Welcome to the Meat Grinder. Planet Carthus Prime. Forward Operating Zone Delta. Lieutenant Varnak had seen many wars. He had survived the glassing of Thernex, the cryo-ambush of Penthil Verge, and once held the line for 6 standard hours while his platoon was torn apart by Korax acid spores. He thought himself prepared for anything. Then he met the humans. The air on Carthus Prime was a heavy, wet miasma that clung to the lungs and rusted steel in days. Jungle rot coated everything, trees, gear, even soldiers. And somewhere beneath the vines and muck, the Krask horde waited, silent and swarming. Varnak's newly assigned unit was mixed species, mostly Zentari and Terran infantry. When he arrived, the humans were already there, setting up with a disturbing casualness. They joked. They smoked something acrid. One even sang. The human medics stood apart. Sergeant Elise Keene was small by human standards, but wore armor that looked 2 sizes too big, patched in at least 5 places and decorated with crude drawings of syringes and skulls. Her helmet was clipped to her side, revealing dark eyes with the calm detachment of someone who'd seen too much and survived anyway. Varnak had reviewed her file. 6 commendations, 3 suspensions. 1 official warning for improvised field surgery involving unapproved stimulant protocols. He didn't understand half the medical terms, but the last line had stuck with him. Operates with extreme efficacy. Do not interfere. Still, he was commander now. He would observe and evaluate her like any other subordinate. Their first engagement came at dusk. Krask drones descended for the trees like locusts, claws flashing and mandibles screeching. Plasma fire lit the canopy. Varnak barked orders, trying to organize his troops, but the humans were already moving, fluid, chaotic, lethal. And then he saw Elise. She wasn't behind the lines. She was in them. Her rifle slung across her back, one hand stabilizing a bleeding Lanari, the other jabbing herself with an injector the size of a flare gun. She hissed, eyes wide, as the fluid hit her bloodstream. Then she ran, not ducked or crawled, ran straight toward a Krask flanking nest. Her sidearm flared once, twice. Then she was there, close enough to stab. Varnak watched her rip a medical cutter from her belt and carve through Krask chitin like it was paper. She screamed, not in pain, but triumph, and dragged a down human back toward the line, panting, laughing. When it was over, 30 Krask lay dead. 2 humans and 3 Zentari were lost. Varnak's armor was cracked, and one of his subordinates had vomited into his respirator. Elise was already treating the wounded, hand steady despite the tremor, now crawling up her arm. Later, as the triage tents were cleared, Varnak approached her. "You self-injected mid-combat," he said flatly. She didn't look up. "Yup. What was it?" "Stuff." "That is not an acceptable answer." She finally glanced at him, expression unreadable. "Sir, you asked a question command stopped asking a long time ago. What I inject is what keeps your people breathing and me alive. Let's not tangle up good outcomes with bad questions." He bristled. "I am your superior officer." "You are," she said, more softly this time. "But unless you're planning to carry wounded across a kill zone while your spleen is bleeding out, you don't want to know what I take to do it." He hesitated. "I'll be filing a report." She pulled a datapad from her pouch and handed it to him. It was a standard human medical file, but most of it was blacked out. The final line read, "Administration classified under Directive 7G. Authorized for combat medics only. Not subject to review." Varnak stared at it. This is sanctioned?" "As sanctioned as war gets," Elise replied. "We do what we have to. You'll get used to it." He didn't reply. He walked back to his tent, datapad still in hand. That night, as alien insects buzzed through the humid dark and wounded soldiers groaned in their cots, Varnak sat awake, watching the human medic treat a child-faced soldier who'd lost a leg. She smiled, told a joke, administered a dose of something glowing blue. And Varnak, hardened veteran of 20 worlds, felt the first stirrings of fear, not of the Krask, not of death, but of the human medics who met both with a needle and a grin. The Lazarus cocktail. Carthus Prime. Med Tent, 0400 hours. Lieutenant Varnak couldn't sleep. It wasn't the jungle heat, the buzzing insects, or the distant guttural clicks of Krask scouts circling their perimeter. It was Sergeant Elise Keene, specifically the cocktail of compounds she'd injected into her own bloodstream during battle like it was morning tea. Varnak stood outside the med tent for nearly half an hour before finally stepping inside. The interior was dimly lit and smelled of antiseptic, old blood, and something sharper, metallic, almost acrid. Elise was seated cross-legged on a supply crate, tying off a Zentari soldier's bandaged arm with practiced ease. She nodded as Varnak entered, but didn't speak. "I've reviewed your medical file," Varnak began. "Must have been a short read," she said without looking up. "I want to know what you're injecting. Not the redacted version. The truth." Elise finished tying the bandage and patted the soldier gently on the shoulder. "You're clear to go, Lieutenant Reek. Don't scratch the graft, or it'll leak." The Zentari gave a low, grateful trill and limped out of the tent. She looked at Varnak. "You sure you want the truth? Most officers regret it. I want to understand what my personnel are using on the battlefield." She sighed and reached into a metal case behind her. Inside were a dozen vials, blue, green, black, even one that shimmered with a pearlescent haze. She held up a gray-labeled one. "This is Lazarus Type 4, developed by Earth's Joint Medical Warfare Command. It boosts clotting, floods the body with synthetic adrenaline analogs, and temporarily suppresses neurological pain signals. It also shreds your liver if you take more than 2 doses in a 48-hour window." Varnak stared at the vial. "You injected that in the field yesterday." She nodded. "Twice. That's suicidal." She smirked. "Only if you're planning to live forever." Varnak walked over slowly, hands behind his back. "How often do human medics rely on these Lazarus cocktails?" "Every combat drop," she said. "We're first in, last out. No time to wait for natural healing when people are bleeding out in minutes." He tilted his head, reptilian eyes narrowing. "They're automated systems, drones, nanobots, emergency field packs. Why risk your life when machines can triage?" "Because machines don't drag a half-dissolved soldier out of a plasma crater with their bare hands. Machines don't decide who gets to live when there's only 1 dose of Regan left. We do. And sometimes the only way to make that call is to take the hit yourself." She rolled up her sleeve and showed him her arm. Needle scars crisscrossed her skin like battle tattoos. "Every one of these bought someone else 5 more minutes. That's the job." He stared in silence, then gestured to the shimmering vial. "And that," Elise's tone dropped, "that's Type 9. Technically experimental. It doesn't just numb pain, it tricks the brain into thinking the body's fine. Adrenaline, dopamine, synthetic norepinephrine, even nanoscopic skeletal binders. Side effects: hallucinations, nerve damage, full body tremors, blackouts, cardiac risk. Some soldiers swear it lets them see time slow down. Others don't come back from it all." Varnak stepped back, suddenly uneasy. She capped the vial and returned it to the case. "You want the truth, Lieutenant? Human medics aren't trained to survive. We're trained to endure. We use our bodies as tools, sometimes weapons, because the people we're saving don't have a choice." He sat down on a nearby crate, his rigid armor creaking. "And your command permits this?" "They pretend not to know," she said quietly. "High command likes the results. They just don't like the cost. So they black out the reports, promote the survivors, and bury the failures." Varnak looked at her for a long moment. "You're killing yourself, 1 syringe at a time." Elise met his gaze. "If that's what it takes to bring 1 more soldier home, it's worth it." He didn't respond. Outside, a siren blared. Krask sighted in the northern quadrant. Another patrol ambushed. Elise stood, grabbed her medkit, and looked over her shoulder. "You coming, Lieutenant?" Varnak hesitated. Then he followed. Next chapter, the story will deepen with moral conflict, cultural contrast, and Varnak's changing perspective as the brutality of Elise's role becomes clearer. Things not written in manuals. Carthus Prime, Urban Ruins, Zone, Theta 5. Lieutenant Varnak crouched behind a collapsed ferrocrete wall, plasma bolts sparking overhead. Krask shrieks echoed through the ruined buildings, closer than any of them liked. The patrol had gone bad fast, an ambush nested inside an ambush. and now they were cut off, 12 soldiers pinned under heavy fire with no hope of extraction for at least 3 hours. "Grenade! Right side!" someone yelled. The explosion threw Varnak against the wall, his carapace armor catching the worst of it. His HUD blinked with damage indicators. Static filled his comms. Through the dust, Sergeant Elise Keene emerged like a ghost. Half-scorched armor, blood on her chin, and a medkit in one hand like it weighed nothing. In her other hand was a large auto-injector, already primed. "You're hit," she said flatly. "I'm fine." She didn't argue. Instead, she knelt beside a wounded Lanari whose entire side had been chewed away by Krask acid. "No Regan left," she muttered. "Fractured ribcage, can't move him." She pulled 2 vials from her belt and stabbed both in her thigh. Her body jerked, spine straightening unnaturally. Her pupils dilated. For a moment, Varnak thought she might collapse. Then she hoisted the Lanari on her back and sprinted through enemy fire toward a shattered building, right through the kill zone. Varnak could only watch. By the time she returned, Elise was shaking violently, barely able to speak. She dropped beside him and began reloading her stim injector with trembling fingers. "This is madness," Varnak said. "You're going to die out here." "Everyone dies out here," she said, voice hoarse. "Most of us just don't get to choose what for. You could have ordered a retreat. You didn't have to. I'm the only one fast enough to cross that gap with him alive. I didn't have time to argue ethics." He grabbed her arm, firm but not violent. "You can't keep doing this. You're becoming a liability." She yanked her arm free. "I'm the reason 5 of your soldiers are still breathing. You think the stims are a crutch? They're my edge." He stared at her, chest rising and falling with fury. "You're not a weapon, Sergeant. You're a medic." Her voice lowered. "You're confusing the title with the job. I'm not here to heal. I'm here to keep people alive, and that sometimes means becoming something you don't write about in manuals." Varnak had no response, not because he disagreed, but because some part of him understood, and that terrified him. The next hour blurred into a desperate crawl through hostile ruins. Elise led point, coordinating suppressive fire and dragging the worst of the wounded behind makeshift cover. Varnak followed in stunned silence, watching a woman who seemed more machine than human. Driven by duty, yes, but also something deeper, something darker. They reached the evac point barely intact. Dropships descended through the smoke like avenging angels, gun ports blazing to keep Krask at bay. Elise collapsed once everyone was aboard, limbs twitching from chemical overload. The medical officer aboard the shuttle reached for her, but she slapped his hand away. "No sedatives, just oxygen." The officer looked at Varnak, confused. He nodded. "Do as she says." Hours later, back at camp, Varnak sat across from Elise outside the recovery tent. Her hand still shook. She tried to drink from a flask, but spilled half of it down her armor. "You'll never walk properly again if you keep this up," he said. "Probably not," she replied, too tired to lie. "Why?" She looked at him, tired and raw. "Because someone has to. Because when the Krask are chewing through our lines, nobody's going to remember who followed protocol. They'll remember who pulled them out when it went to hell." Varnak leaned forward. "We have rules for a reason." "So do I," she said. "Rule 1. Never let anyone die alone if I can help it. Rule 2. If I go down trying." He was quiet for a long time. Later that night, he opened a secure channel and sent a short message to his command. Human medic, Sergeant Elise Keene. Recommend full autonomy on all field medical protocol. Do not question her injections. Do not interfere. She's the reason we are still alive. Next chapter, the final assault looms, and Elise must push her body beyond its limits one last time, knowing it may kill her. Varnak must decide whether to stop her or finally understand her. The line we cross. Carthus Prime, Siege of Outpost Virex. It was supposed to be a fallback position. Outpost Virex had walls, guns, drone support, and 3 full squads. But none of that mattered when the Krask came in force. They poured from the jungle like a living tide, overwhelming sentries in minutes. The perimeter alarms were still screaming when the first barricade collapsed. Lieutenant Varnak barked orders over the din, trying to organize a retreat to the inner compound. He could see it already, a slaughter in slow motion. The Krask weren't just fighting. They were hunting. And somewhere in the chaos, Sergeant Elise Keene was running out of miracles. She moved like a blur through smoke and screams, dragging soldiers, jabbing syringes, ignoring her own bleeding leg. Varnak saw her administer 3 stims in as many minutes, her limbs twitching under the chemical weight. She stumbled once, fell to a knee, then rose again. "Cover the west breach," Varnak roared. His men responded barely. Everyone was running on fumes. Elise appeared beside him, face ghost-pale and drenched in sweat. "If we don't hold that hallway, they'll flood the infirmary. You're in no shape." She shoved a stim into her neck. Her pupils flared wide. "Don't start," she hissed. "You gave me autonomy. Let me use it." Varnak grabbed her by the shoulder. "This will kill you." She smiled weakly. "That's always been the deal." And then she was gone again. Minutes passed like lifetimes. Krask bodies piled in the corridors. Elise fought like a woman possessed, injecting a dying soldier with one hand, firing a sidearm with the other. Her body was starting to fail. Varnak saw it in the way she staggered, in the way she began slurring orders. Still, she refused to stop. They finally reached the command bunker as the last evac shuttle touched down outside. Elise collapsed inside the doorway, too weak to rise. Her gear was soaked in blood, her breathing shallow. Varnak knelt beside her, hands trembling. "You're done. No more injections." Her hand fumbled for another vial. I can get the last 2 out." He caught her wrist gently. "No, it's over." She looked up at him, eyes glassy. "They're still out there. They need me." He shook his head. "You've done enough. You've done everything." She exhaled, a breath that sounded like surrender. Paramedics swarmed in moments later, lifting her onto a stretcher. One of them looked to Varnak. "What do we stabilize her with?" He stared down at the cracked vials hanging from her belt, each a violation of regulation, each a reason they were alive. He answered quietly, "Whatever she'd use." 2 days later, command debrief, fleet carrier arc of silence. Varnak stood before the brass, triad generals, intelligence directors, and medical command. A dozen species sat in judgment. The Krask threat had been repelled. Carthus Prime was scorched but secure. Sergeant Elise Keene, a Zentari admiral, said, reviewing the datapad. "Multiple violations of medical protocol. Stimulant overdoses. Experimental compounds. Psychological red flags. And you're recommending a commendation?" "I'm not recommending it," Varnak said. "I'm demanding it." The room stiffened. "She saved over 40 lives," he continued. "Dragged wounded through acid rain, fought on torn ligaments, kept breathing while her blood stopped clotting. I watched her inject herself with a nerve-searing painkiller just to lift a soldier off a collapsing deck. She broke every rule we have. She became the rule. She didn't follow doctrine. She was doctrine. Living, bleeding triage. Her injections weren't drugs. They were battlefield math. Trade her body for time. Trade pain for speed. Trade years off her life for seconds that save others." There was silence. Finally, Zoran Admiral leaned forward. "Why not just ban these methods entirely? Why keep such dangerous medics in the field?" Varnak met every eye in the room. "Because the Krask don't fear our guns. They don't fear our fleets. But when a medic charges into hell on fire, half dead, and still save a squad, we become something they don't understand. Something terrifying." He paused. "And that's why field commanders no longer ask what human medics are administering to themselves." Epilogue. Recovery Bay 9, Fleet Medical Wing. Elise stared out the viewport, an 4 in her arm and a neural brace around her spine. Varnak stepped inside quietly, a data chip in his hand. "Commendation file," he said. "Fleet Cross. Highest honor available to non-command personnel." She smiled barely. "What's the catch?" "They want you off the front lines." She nodded, slowly. "Might be time." He turned to leave, then paused. "Thank you, Sergeant. For all of it." She smirked. "Just doing my job, sir." And for the first time since Carthus Prime, Varnak believed it was true.